Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everyone. It's top of the hour, wherever you are, 4 o'clock here in Central Time in Austin, Texas. We know we'll have some more folks join as we get on. I see the numbers ticking up, but we're gonna go ahead and get started. We are recording this webinar so that folks can watch it afterwards, again, if needed, reference pieces of it, share with others who weren't able to join today. So welcome to this first informational webinar for the 2022 SEL in Action Awards. My name is Joe Anderson. I'm a senior consultant with Education First, which is one of the organizations that partners on the SEL in Action Awards. I'm joined by some colleagues here. You'll see them in the chat. You'll hear from some of them. You'll see their faces on Zoom. Erin, Janie, Kelly, and Fatima are here from our team at EdFirst. And want to send special thanks to everyone on behalf of the Novo Foundation who provides the generous funding for the SEL in Action Awards. So I'm gonna do a little bit of an intro here for how the webinar is going to work and some reminders, and then we'll dig into what you came to hear, and I'll have plenty of time for your questions as well. So in the next hour or so, we will, after this introductory piece, we're going to share a little bit about why we do this work and the history of the SEL in Action Awards and the SEL in Action Fund. We'll spend some time going over some of the key parts of the RFP and the application, including eligibility criteria, the instructions, and the timeline for both the applications and the selection of the grants. A lot of your questions, I believe, will get answered during this part. And we appreciate the questions that you submitted while you were registering for this webinar. So we got an idea of the questions we need to answer. And then we'll leave a lot of time at the end for you to actually put your questions that we didn't answer into the chat, possibly come off mute and ask them yourself. So throughout the presentation, throughout the webinar today, feel free to add questions in the chat. Our team is there to either answer them directly in the chat if they can, or pause at different times throughout the webinar where we can voice over our answers to those questions. Make sure, just to help us all with this relatively large group, make sure that your Zoom is muted unless you're speaking to the group. I think everyone should be automatically muted when you came in. There is a live transcript available under Zoom bar as well that you can reference if that's helpful to you. As I said, type your questions into the chat and we'll reply to you there, or we'll voice it over at times throughout the webinar. And at any time, if you have a specific question or want some more information or anything at all, you can always reach us at our SEL in Action at education-first.com email address. And we'll get back to you pretty quickly that way. So if you don't mind, if you haven't already, in the meeting chat, say hello. Tell us who you are, where you're joining us from. You can use the prompts that are on the screen. So colleague Erin, she's with Education First. She's joining from Spokane, Washington. I saw her give her a little wave. So if you don't mind, just give us an idea of who you are. You can tell us what organization, school, or district you're from, and where you're joining us from today in the chat. Thanks for doing that.
I see Columbia, Maryland. I see Indianapolis. Oh, it's going so fast. Chicago, Illinois, Portland, Oregon, Northern Kentucky, more folks from Chicago. Hello, Chicago, Phoenix, Arizona, Elk Grove, California, Portland, Maine. We are literally coast to coast today, folks. This is so exciting. We've got folks in Texas, folks in St. Louis, Cincinnati, Ohio, Los Angeles, California, Atlanta, Idaho. Wow, so many folks. Thank you for joining. Thank you for coming from so many different parts of the country.
All right. So continue to do that if you haven't said hello in the chat yet. I'm going to pass it to one of my colleagues, Kelly James, to talk a little bit about the history of this grant and why we do this work with the Novo Foundation.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. And so excited to see how many people have showed up to this call today. So welcome. Again, I'm Kelly James, and I'm a partner with Education First, and we'll talk a little bit more about our role in supporting this work. Before we jump in, we really want to make sure you kind of know the why behind we created the SEL in Action Awards. And if we go ahead, I don't know if it's showing up for you, but there come some of the pictures. When we really started this work, we really wanted to support initiatives that students themselves believe are critical to their own and their school community social and emotional well-being. And so on the screen, hopefully you're seeing some photos from current and former awardees. So we've got classes integrating self-awareness and the language of emotions and to their reading. We've got students participating in a book club that is really self-driven and self-facilitated. We've got educators practicing radical listening to better teach and serve their students. We've got students connecting with one another and with nature. And then we have students who are blind learning how to build relationships virtually. So you'll see this incredible diversity across the SEL in Action Awards, and these are only a few examples. So with that, just want to talk about the people behind these awards and particularly call out Novo Foundation that has provided the financial support for SEL in Action since 2016, and that really supports this belief that educators and students, those most closest to the work, are critical to help design and implement the solutions that we seek. And so in addition to Novo Foundation, we have Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors and Education First, two partner organizations who are strongly committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion for students, families, educators, and all school and district staff. Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors holds and helps make the grant funds. And then Education First, in addition to our work in running this process, our goal is ultimately support the educators that are awarded grants. And so that will range from a convening for grantees, for webinars, for affinity groups, different ways to support you as you actually get into implementing the work. So next slide. Again, the belief in creating this fund was to recognize that all of you, the students, educators, and partners working directly in schools, are the experts and can design your own solutions to opportunities and challenges within your communities. We also want to acknowledge that, one single, small grant cannot and should not be the only action to address these needs. However, we really believe and are hopeful that by providing this grant funding directly to educators, schools, and districts, we can help catalyze you and your work and ultimately, hopefully, sustain the larger work that school communities are doing to meet every child's and adult's social, emotional, and academic needs. So going to the next slide, just want to give a little bit of a snapshot of, these awards and kind of their progression over history. You can see on the screen again that we started in 2016. We started with only 25 grants to teachers and have grown each year. I guess with the pandemic, we did see a drop in both, applications last year, but we're seeing quite a bit of interest kind of going into this next round of applications. So I don't know that people are coming through the pandemic yet, but we see that there is incredible commitment by educators and districts to be able to provide these supports to teachers and students within their classrooms and communities. So with that, just one other resource we wanted to flag for you is selforteachers.org. And if you're interested, and again, beyond the few projects that we highlighted earlier, on the site, you can find summaries of each current and former awardee. You can actually filter by a variety of topics within SEL and different student populations, making it easy for you to see, who's doing work in restorative practices and urban schools. Again, this is to just give you some snapshots into the type of work that's been funded. There's more resources on that site that you can, peruse and learn from. But, again, there's so many topics, and we're really looking for you to define and share and apply for what makes most sense for your community and your context. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to my colleague, Joe.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kelly. We'll pause in just a couple of moments for some of the questions that might be coming in already. So if you haven't already and you've got questions ready, feel free to put those in the chat at any time. Our team's taking a look at those and can respond or voice them over. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the application itself, including the eligibility criteria, as well as our application timeline and process. A lot of the questions that we've been getting so far in email and when folks register for this webinar, I think we'll be able to answer over the next few minutes, because a lot of the questions we do get relate to eligibility. But please put your questions in there if we don't answer them specifically. The most important thing to remember, and that's called out in the RFP materials, is that the lead applicant, whether it's for the educator or district level award, is that the lead applicant must be a school-based employee for educator-led grants, or a district employee, which includes charter schools and charter school networks for the district level awards. That means that while organizations such as nonprofit and other organizations can certainly partner with applicants on their applications and their grant activities should they be awarded, we just want to make sure that the lead applicant, and you'll see that section very clearly on the application, is a school and or district employee. That helps us ensure that there is some commitment and buy-in for that teacher, school, and or district to be able to implement the grant should they be awarded. And because of the focus of these awards is on U.S. and U.S. territory public school students. The image that you see on the screen, the table, is the same that's in the RFP materials. So we put it out here. So just a couple of reminders. For the educator-led awards, the maximum request is $8,000. This is a one-year proposal in either case. The timeline of the grant will run approximately beginning August 1st of 2022 through August of 2023. So about a calendar year. That should give grantees time to design and implement during the upcoming 2022-2023 school year. If you are a former or current SEL in Action Award grantee, you are eligible to apply for a new grant. There's a note here that those applications of former and current grantees will be considered alongside other current and former awardees, not new applicants. And there are a few additional questions in your application that you'll see that you'll need to answer if you are a current or former awardee. So please pay attention to that. Same is true for the district level awards. Although the maximum award amount is $30,000, also for the same period of time, August 2022 to August 2023. And the deadlines for both awards applications is the same. End of the day Pacific time on March 14th. One of the questions that we frequently get is, can I apply to both? Yes, you can definitely apply to both the educator-led awards and the district level awards. In some cases, it's not incredibly common, but in some cases in the past, we have awarded the same district, both a district level award and an educator-led award for an educator or school that's team in that district. So those are considered in different application pools by our team of reviewers. Everything for the application materials, and the application itself is online. I think you've probably seen that website if you're joining this webinar, but we'll frequently share it out during this webinar and afterwards as a reminder to where you can find all those application materials. I'm going to answer one of the questions, then I'll pause and see if Aaron has any that have come up from the chat. But one of the other main questions that we do get, I alluded to this a moment ago, is about non-school or non-district organizations. so non-local education agencies that might be interested in applying and whether or not they're eligible. The short answer is no, not directly. So a 501c3 nonprofit, another nonprofit, a private organization, an organization that's not considered a local education agency in your state is not eligible to apply as the lead applicant for a grant. However, again, we welcome and encourage partnerships between those organizations that are providing services, and we'll be helping to design and implement the activities in the proposal with either the educator who's leading the grant application or the district employee who's leading the application for the district level awards. And if you have, I'm sure there's special cases, and if you have a special case that you just want a clear answer to, feel free to email us if we don't get to answer it on this webinar. But I'm going to pause there and just see if there are any eligibility related questions. Erin.
Yes, thanks, Joe. So we'll kick off with one that gets a little bit more specific, but are nonprofit private schools eligible? Our school serves children K through 12 with special needs, but we're not a public school. Are we eligible?
So probably some more information via email would be helpful to be able to give you an exact answer. It sounds like probably not eligible to apply. However, we try to remain quite broad with our eligibility criteria. So for example, if your school receives public education funding, either state or federal dollars, to help fund your school and programs, it's likely that you would be eligible. But again, please email us if you have a kind of a unique case like that, and we can give you a better answer via email.
And another question, if a district is a 501c3, can they be a lead organization? Again,
I think this sounds similar, that'd be helpful to the last question, and that'd be helpful if you want to share a bit more information over email so that we can give you a clear response. It will depend, again, if your school receives public education funds from the state or federal government, and or whether your school or district organization is considered a local education agency in your state. So we know that that term can differ in its definition state to state. So for example, some states have education service centers or regional education centers that are considered LEAs in the state, and then would therefore be eligible to apply for a grant as a lead applicant, and then they might serve a large geographic area or even multiple districts. So there's a lot of nuance there. Give us an email if we can help answer any specific questions.
Excellent. Another question, is a public charter school that is its own district eligible as a district applicant and lead applicant?
Yes, short answer is yes. A bit more explanation is that yes, if you're considered your own district, and that could be a single school or single school building that's split between different grade levels or different schools within a single location, all those would be eligible to apply for the district level award as well as an educator-led award.
Great. And question about partnering organizations. Can like a district partner with an outside nonprofit organization and multiple districts apply with that same partner?
Yes, again, short answer is yes, definitely, as long as the district and or an educator in the district is listed as a lead applicant on the application. Just make that very clear. This is not part of our eligibility criteria, but it's worth mentioning because in past years we have seen where multiple applications have come in with the same partner organization working with multiple districts, and they've been essentially identical applications. So our review team will just take a closer look at those types of applications if they're identical applications coming from different districts but working with the same partner. And we would encourage you, if that's your case, to kind of explain how the partnership would work and explain how a single grant versus multiple grants would be used to work in partnership with multiple districts.
Excellent. And another question, does the lead applicant need to be a full-time district employee, or can part-time employees be the lead applicant?
Part-time employees of a school under district are perfectly okay and eligible to be a lead applicant.
Perfect. And I'm going to say that this chat is incredibly robust. You all are doing a fantastic job of keeping the questions coming. We're a little behind, but I think, Joe, go ahead and keep going on. If we will try and catch up with some of the questions, but feel free if we didn't get to your question, pop it again in the chat, and we will get to them as quickly as we can. And we'll definitely keep putting our email address into the chat. So if we don't get to them live on this call, you'll have our email address and you can ask offline as well. So Joe, kind of keep us moving along, and hopefully some of the questions you've asked, I see there's questions in here about funding. We'll definitely get to those as well as you continue, Joe. So keep on going.
Okay. Sounds great. Thanks, Erin. So a couple more things that aren't related to eligibility, but more about prioritization. So our team of reviewers and our team who has designed this grant application and process itself, along in partnership with the Nova Foundation, we've prioritized proposals, applications that specifically support one or more of the following student populations. You'll see this list in the RFP materials. You've seen it. You'll see it in the application itself. And it's important to note that we recognize that this list of student populations includes both students' identities as well as their circumstances. And the purpose of this is that we want to be sure that when our reviewers are selecting the highest quality grants, that they're able to see clearly in your applications the students that you'll be working with and supporting and working in partnership with, and the ways in which the students themselves are identifying the needs and how their needs related to social, emotional, and academic learning will be met through your proposed grant work. There's also a space in the application to indicate if your proposal does not specifically focus on one of these student populations. That is okay, and there's plenty of space to describe if you'll be working with all students, for example, or multiple student populations that are on this list. So please just do your best to describe that in your application itself. And in addition to the priority student populations for the grants, we are considering this somewhat long list of things that you see on the screen, and it's also in the RFP materials. So some of the things our reviewers look for as they're reviewing the grant applications, that the work they're proposing to do is student-led, meaning that it's done with students in partnership, not necessarily to students. It's not adults making all the decisions or doing all the activities. It's focused on student outcomes as opposed to only adult outcomes. We understand that adult SEL is incredibly relevant, incredibly critical, especially in recent years. And that is an important part of any SEL implementation. What we're asking here is that your work is not simply and solely focused on adult SEL. So be clear about what the student outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. Looking for things that are original, innovative, that meet the context in which you are working in your schools and districts and school communities. They bring an orientation of racial and/or social justice. We want to ensure that there is a principal, school leader, or district leader, or support from your colleagues. So the more you can demonstrate that in your applications, that there is support beyond the lead applicant for doing this work, the better. We want to ensure that applicants are considering what trauma-informed practices, what sort of implicit biases, what culturally affirming approaches to teaching are relevant in the work that you're proposing. We're looking for proposals that are creating alternative and restorative practices of accountability and discipline. We are looking for proposals that foster deeper connections to nature or to the natural world, and/or focus on teacher retention and morale. Now, this is quite a long list. It's also quite a diverse list, where our expectation is not that any single application is going to cover all or even most of these things, but hopefully this gives you an idea of the types of work and themes that our reviewers are looking for. And as I mentioned earlier, we do welcome the partnerships. One of the questions that I'm sure is in the chat somewhere, we've received a lot about related to partnerships that I'll just answer now, and then we'll get back to some of the other questions in a sec. What are the options for the actual grant funding? So the dispersal of grant funds. We and the Noble Foundation and Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors try to be as flexible as we can with all of these grants to ensure that the funds are being spent in the right way as the grantee intended, and that you as a grantee have our trust and you have our flexibility to be able to do the work that you know needs to be done, because you're the expert, you're the practitioner there at the local level working with students. So one of the ways that we are flexible is that if you are selected to receive a grant, even though we require a school or district employee to be the lead applicant, we do offer some options for where the grant funds can be dispersed. So that could be a 501c3 or other nonprofit. That could be another partner organization that can actually receive the funds and manage the grant funds in partnership with the school or district or educator. And sometimes that just makes it easier on both the partner organization and the school district, for example, to have the funds be distributed that way. So if you have any further questions about that, let us know in email. And then should you be selected, we'll provide a lot more information about how that can work. And then last couple things here, make sure that all applications are required to be submitted online through our application portal. There is a big apply now button near the bottom of our website that has all the SEL and Action Award information on it. You'll need to create an account. It's very simple if you haven't applied in the past. But that just ensures us that we're able to review everything and we're able to communicate back with you in your email and phone number if needed for any further communication, including notification. As I mentioned earlier, the application deadline for both the educator-led and the district level awards is end of day Pacific time on March 14th. So there's still a bit of time before that deadline. Our team will be reviewing all of the applications. Every single application will be reviewed between now as we're receiving them and through after the application deadline. As you saw earlier, we typically receive hundreds, if not over 1,000 applications, so it does take a little bit of time, and we appreciate your patience as our team reviews. By the end of May, our goal is before Memorial Day, before some schools and districts are ending their school year, that we communicate with all applicants about the status of their application. So that lead applicant and their email address will be used to communicate whether their application was selected or not to receive a grant, and you'll receive further information if you're selected for an award. All right. Erin, are there other questions?
Yes, we definitely have some more questions. I will keep voicing them over, and it looks like more are coming into the chat. So please keep them coming into the chat. And if for whatever reason we don't get to your question, feel free to drop us an email and we'll keep our email in the chat as well. So a question from Carol: would an employee from a special education cooperative working with the districts be able to be the lead applicant, or a state board of education funding birth to 3 prevention programs?
So for the first example, an employee of a special ed co-op, yes, we've actually had some grantees who have been that exact role, special education cooperatives that are working with multiple districts. So yes, definitely eligible. Repeat the second part again about the state board funded, I think, early childhood.
Yeah, absolutely. So that one was, or a state board of education funded birth to 3 prevention program.
So I will say that our focus is starting with pre-K over school, but you would not be ineligible. So I would say you would be eligible if that's your case. You would be eligible to apply. I think our priority though is pre-K age and through 12th grade. But I would still encourage you to apply. We have awarded in the past some early childhood awards, focused awards. Again, as long as it sounds like they are publicly funded through state or federal education dollars.
Fantastic. Can the project be a one-day SEL event?
Ooh, great question. I don't know if we've gotten that question exactly before. I don't see why not. Yes, as long as you're, in your application that you're, describing the purpose and your goals and all the other prompts and questions that are in that application. There's no restrictions about the length of time that the grant activities will actually be done, within that 1 year period from August to August.
So this kind of goes back to sort of charter schools and private schools. Is a charter school with a program in partnership with a private school able to apply for the program as a lead applicant?
Yes, and just please just explain that partnership as best you can in your application, including the students that will be involved, populations that will be involved, things like that.
Great. Are university training and laboratory public schools eligible? They do receive public per pupil funding.
Yes. And we have had some university lab schools apply and receive SEL in Action Award grants in the past. So yes.
Okay, moving right along. If a district applies in partnership with a nonprofit organization, is this a subcontract?
And that kind of goes back to my explanation of our flexibility and the options for how the grant is actually dispersed. The grant funds are actually dispersed. So the answer, it would be up to the partners in the work. So an example could be the district, of course, is the lead applicant. The district's application is selected for an award, and the district chooses to receive the grant funds directly to the district. And in that case, it would be up to the district to decide how and if to subcontract or subgrant to the partner organization. But we would also allow for the grant funds to be dispersed directly to the partner organization with permission from the district, if that's a better option for all organizations involved.
Fantastic. So this is one about, again, kind of about partnership and that lead applicant question. So the question is, I work for an outside organization and have partnered with a counselor as my lead applicant, but I want to do the bulk of the work in filling out the application. And so when you log in, you have to create a profile, and then that sort of becomes the lead applicant. So is there a way for this person to fill out the application, do a lot of that work, but then the partner is the lead applicant?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we can't tell who's filling out the information on the online application. We, have to go by the information that we see there, including the lead applicant's name and email address and other contact information. There is a space to include other team members or partners in the work and their information as well. So I don't think I can give you like a 100% this is what you should do answer, but you could decide that you're named as a partner if you're actually helping with writing the application, which is perfectly fine. You could work with your colleague to, share the login information or something like that. So I think that's the best answer we could probably provide at this time.
Awesome, thank you. And this is a question, again, way back up in the chat. We're still catching up, so keep those good questions coming. A question about, was a letter of intent, an LOI, due on February 1st? And this is a great question, because I know we had a couple great programs going at the same time. Joe, can you voice that over?
Sure. For the SEL in Action Awards, for the grants that we've been talking about today, and the ones that are due, the application due on March 14th, no, there was no LOI due. With the Nova Foundation and Education First and our SEL in Action Fund, we do have multiple grants opportunities. Some of them are happening simultaneously. So you may be referring to or thinking of a separate grant program that's also through the SEL in Action Fund related to teacher retention and morale. And if so, send us an email if you need further clarification, and we can point you in the right direction. But
Awesome.
no LOIs are due for this grant.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe. Another question, can the funds be used in part for the development of a new school that will be opening in 2023 with a strong SEL component?
Yes, obviously without seeing the full proposal, but I would think yes, especially if, again, thinking about the timeline of this award, in which the grant activities will take place and the funds will be spent from August of this year to August of 2023. So as long as that's the case, and again, in your application, you're describing, the purpose and the goals and the activities carefully, then there's no reason why that wouldn't be an appropriate use.
So another question, also, can an alternative public high school that receives transfer students from multiple schools across the city apply for a district grant? It's not multiple schools, but has multiple feeder schools.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually talking with a current grantee about this similar thing the other day. Send us an email just to explain your case, or so we can take a closer look at your school and be 100% sure we're giving you the right information. Because we know that some schools are individual entities, a single school, which it sounds like your case might be. There are others that are sort of a different designation for the state. So it gets a little complex. If it's a single school and not considered like its own local education agency, it's likely that you would only be eligible to apply for the educator-led awards. But again, send an email and we can get you some more detailed information if that would be helpful.
Thank you. So the next question is kind of looking actually to final reports. So if awarded and the grantee has to fill out a final report, does the final report ask for student outcomes in pre/post test scores, or which other data do you look for in the final report?
That's a great question. No, we do not ask for student outcomes or student data, and certainly no individual student or even adult data at all. The types of information that we try to keep our reports as minimal as possible, reporting requirements, again, just so you as a grantee and the folks that you're working with can spend the bulk of your time doing the work that you've been granted money to do and not worried as much about reporting. So there will be a final report, a narrative and a short budget report that focuses on the categories of spending that you've done, so not individual receipts or anything like that. And then for the narrative report, we do ask questions related to the outcomes that you propose in your grant application. So things like, what were your goals for this grant, and what sort of progress have you made towards those goals, and what sort of evidence do you have? We're not expecting quantitative data, student data, or anything like that. No pre and post test, unless that's a focus of your work. So other types of anecdotal data, artifacts from your grant work, those sorts of things are more in line with what we're asking for in the final report.
Thank you. Another question, how does number of students served weigh? How does number of hours or depth of program weigh? Can you speak to those pieces a little bit more?
Sure. The number of students is more for our own information. Like our reviewers will certainly look at that and consider that along with the whole of your application. But we don't, if it sounds like you might be asking, do we weigh applicants who are, will be serving 1,000 students more so than an applicant who might be serving 20 students or fewer? And the short answer is no. And in fact, over the years, we've had district awardees who in the entire district, there are 20 students in the entire tiny school district. And we've, awarded individual educator-led awards teachers who work even across schools in a district or across districts and serve 1,000 students in a school year. So it's really looked at holistically and not weighted in a particular way for a larger number of students, for example. Erin, what was the second part of the question?
Yeah, the first was the students served, and the second was sort of like the number of hours or depth of a program.
Yeah, so we're not, there's no specific question about number of hours or anything like that. So it's not something that we look at closely. It really, I think the questions in the application itself really tell the story of the things that our reviewers are looking for and prioritizing. So given your own school community context and the opportunities and assets and needs of your students that you've identified and students themselves have identified, like what are the things that, why are the things that you're proposing important for your local context and for your students and your colleagues, and how are you going to do it, and why will that make a difference and affect aspects of your students' social, emotional, and academic learning. So that's, that was a very quick summary, but those are the things that matter to our reviewers. And if that means that you're implementing certain programs or you're working with more kids or fewer kids, tell us about it. But we really look at your applications holistically.
Awesome. So next question, are you looking for proposals that impact multiple target communities or one specific demographic?
Either. So we don't set any internally, we don't set any type of quotas or targets for for grants that will work with the different student populations that are listed there, and I showed earlier, as well as the types of SEL related work and things like that. So it's not really, we look at those because we want to be able to see the connection between the students, again, and their assets and their identities and their needs and the type of work that you're proposing, and a rationale for that and logical connections between those things. But we don't have specific targets, and we don't prioritize an application that is focusing on a single student population versus multiple student populations. All are equally considered.
All right, next question. If we're applying as a district, do the funds need to be shared across multiple school sites, or can they focus on supporting an initiative for a single school site?
Great question. Our definition in RFP materials is that work that's happening across multiple schools. So not a single school site. We'd expect that the district level award would be happening at least 2 schools. But again, if you have a special circumstance or special like definitions of your schools or school buildings and things like that, just send us a follow-up email. You're on mute, Erin.
I'm muted. Always a fun thing. Too many things juggling. We are seeking funding to provide SEL professional development at the district level for our contracted out-of-school time providers at 7 middle schools to start. The cost would be stipends and books, and I fear that it would not be a good candidate for funding since our budget is really those 2 items. So any advice?
We'll provide some advice that we provided already in the application materials, and we're generally not able to provide like individualized advice, but I think this is helpful to lots of folks who might have a similar question. Short answer is those uses of funds are completely appropriate, and the guidance that we provide in the application materials is that we're very unlikely to select applications that are proposing to use the majority of their funds on 3 categories. So any of these 3 categories. The first is out-of-the-box curriculum materials. So SEL programs, they're incredibly critical in many places as a part of an overall SEL strategy and implementation, but it's simply not the focus of this grant. So out-of-the-box curriculum kits, those sorts of things, we're unlikely to award applications that use the majority of funds for those. The second category is technology, especially hardware. So if your proposal has a majority of your funds being used to purchase iPads or other devices and things like that, again, we see the value in that, but it's not a focus of this grant program. It usually goes for software too. So for like licenses for an SEL program online for students, we would include that in the technology kind of restriction that we look at. And the third category that we look at closely is furniture. So if a majority of your grant funds are proposed to be used for like flexible seating, for example, or redesigning a room in your school building, it's then likely to get funding. But those are the only three areas that that we call out. So things like personnel, whether it's salary, benefits, stipends for adults and even students, like perfectly welcome. Books and other materials that are not just out of the box curricula. And in all cases, when you're listing your budget and explaining your budget, it's just, of course, it's helpful to explain like how these fit into your overall proposal and the activities, so that our reviewers can see the connections and the use and rationale.
Fantastic, thank you. Would students at risk of graduating be considered a priority group?
So we don't list them as a priority group on our RFP materials that you saw. But I would encourage you in your application there's an option to select other. I would encourage you to do that, to select that and describe the students that you'd be working with and how your work will be meeting their needs.
Excellent, Joe. And there was a question in the chat, which we did answer in the chat, but probably worth a voiceover. Can you speak to flexibility and COVID? What happens if somebody writes a proposal and things change? Like, how flexible can we be with changing circumstances?
We can be very, and we appreciate the flexibility of the Nobel Foundation and Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, as well as our first team, and of course, all of your flexibility over the past couple of years. It's been incredible, of course. And so if that's the case in which you're selected to receive a grant and things change because of COVID, because of other disruptions, but we'll work with you. And that could be right away before the grant funds are dispersed. That could be even after you've received the grant funds and you're in the middle of implementation. Like, we'll work with you. Kelly mentioned earlier, like part of our role at First is to support this cohort of grantees and even former grantees. And so our team will be there to make sure that you're getting what you need, to make sure that your grant can be implemented, even if it's a slightly different or has to be revised in some way because of those types of circumstances.
Thanks so much. Next question. Could a group of school counselors assigned to different schools apply for a district level SEL grant?
I love all these scenarios. This is so fun to think through. Our team does this constantly. I believe so, yes. That sounds like you'll be working across multiple schools in a district or multiple districts in that case. And yes, so that would be a great the opportunity to apply for a district level award.
Great. And that actually led me to a follow-up question, like, what if the district was applying and didn't know the counselors were applying? Can a district apply for two different awards at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. So we've actually had, again, it's not very common, but we've actually had districts in the past who have received two separate district level awards, for two different initiatives. And they might be working in the same schools or similar, some of the same schools, but they might be working completely different schools. So yeah, we keep our applications open for as many applications as you would like to submit across both the educator and the district level. And we don't, I think to a certain degree, our reviewing team is not going to take into consideration the number of high quality applications that we receive from the same district or even the same school. So we, if we get something crazy and there's every single selected award is from the same district, which wouldn't happen, we'll work through that. But we've had, again, a district who's received multiple district awards. We even had multiple teachers at the same school who have received educator-led awards.
Awesome, thank you. I will also take this moment just to voice over. I think we're starting to catch up on questions, but we have about just less than 10 minutes left together. We'll get to as many questions as we can in the next 9 minutes or so. But if we don't get to your question, please do email us, selinaction@education-first.com. Or for those of you who are grammar people, it's a hyphen, a dash, the little dash, the little hyphen, education-first.com. So the next, a couple more questions. This is sort of, again, that kind of who can team up to do something. So if school social workers team up as a duo/trio of schools, would we be able to apply for the district level grant, or is that reserved for administrators, principals? I think that's really similar to the question you just answered, but wanted to just voice that one over too.
It does sound similar. So yeah, I think in that case, again, our definition of a district level grant is pretty broad and just mostly means working across multiple schools. So in that case, that sounds like that would be true, and you'd be eligible to apply for a district level award. And our criteria for like the lead applicant of a district level award is any district employee. So it doesn't have to be, a district level administrator, superintendent, assistant superintendent, anything like director, or anything like that. We highly recommend, and we mentioned this in the RFP and the application, we recommend that if you are applying on behalf of your district, that you work with folks that might need to know about your application early on, especially because if you're selected, we'll need to work through the details of getting the grant funds to you, and making sure that there is commitment to the grant work and spending the funds if selected.
Excellent. And here's a question for one of our previous slides. So it might be helpful to go back just to look at it. But in one of the earlier slides, the number of teacher and district awards per year was shown, but the number of applicants in total, it didn't differentiate them. So do you have a breakdown of the number of teacher and district applicants for the past few years?
We do. I think some of that information is on the bottom of our SEL in Action Awards website, where it breaks it down by educator versus district applicants. So check there. I'm thinking off the top of my head about the last few years, and it's honestly been quite even in the number of applications that we've received for the two separate application pools, the educator awards and the district level awards. So for example, last year we received 400 total applications. It was roughly split halfway, 200-ish, 200-ish in each of those. And that's been the case for, I think, every year. So what that means, of course, if you're doing the math, right, is that typically most years that a higher percentage of the educator applications is selected and a lower percentage of the district applications is selected. And that's just how it's kind of trended out over the past few years.
Thanks for voicing that over and for going back in the deck. And yeah, and at the risk of saying this, I think we're caught up on the questions in the chat. I think we have either answered them in the chat or voiced them over. So folks, we're caught up on questions. What other questions do you have? If you're like me, your questions like kind of live in your belly. You're like, oh, there's that question. It's right there. So if you have any questions that are living in your belly or wherever else your questions live, please pop them into the chat and we'll get through as many more as come up in the next 6 minutes. And then will this webinar be available for review?
Yep, great question. So pretty soon, I think by tomorrow at the latest, we'll have the webinar recording that'll have the slides and the audio and everything in chat available on a link to our website, and we'll link it at the top of the FAQ document as well. And as you see on the slide here, we've been updating our FAQ document pretty frequently as we've received questions via email, and we're going to do the same thing after this webinar. So we'll add the questions that are and responses that aren't already there that we've heard today to our FAQ document, and we'll add the link to the recording to share with anyone that might want to reference it or watch it for the first time. And if you've registered, you're here, and which means that you registered for this webinar, you'll get a follow-up email with the recording link and reminders too.
Excellent. Another question. If funds are going directly to a nonprofit, do you list someone from that organization as the grant administrator on the application?
Yeah, we recommend that you do that. That'd be great. If you're confident that that's going to be your plan, should you be selected, please do that. And that helps us as we're notifying selected applicants later in May, that we can include those folks so they're in the loop from the beginning, and we can start all the the process of the paperwork and getting the grant final.
Fantastic, thanks. And a question we did miss, so thank you so much, Tanisha, for asking it again. If an SEL educator under contract to teach on campus during the school day was eligible to apply, would that person be an eligible lead applicant?
If you're on contract and you're contracted with the school district or school, yes. But I know that can vary. So if you want to shoot us an email with your specific question or scenario, please do.
Fantastic. I think once again, we're caught up in the chat. So please keep the questions coming. We've got a few more minutes, but definitely just want to pause and just send so much gratitude to all of you on this call. Thank you for being here, for spending this hour with us. I know it's really snowy in many parts of the country where you are, so thanks for spending part of your snow day with us. Thank you for all that you do for students. I know it's been a crazy couple of years, and life is changing and really unpredictable. So I am so grateful to all of you for everything you do and everything you do for yourself and your students and your communities. So much gratitude. And with that, I think we do have a couple, let's see, one more question. So I noticed that you have to sign up for an account to apply. Is there a way to see the questions /field/prompts without the account?
Unfortunately, there's not. I mean, you'll get a sense of what we ask in the RFP itself, but to see the actual questions, you need to access the online application.
Great. And I think just to also tag on to that too, making a profile does not obligate you to complete an application. So you can make a profile, see it all. And if you never hit submit, that's also totally fine. And seeing lots of gratitude in the chat, Joe. I know it was a pretty active chat, so hopefully you're seeing that gratitude too. Thanks for answering so many questions. And definitely, I know if you all are like me, sometimes you leave one of these, so much information, and then you're walking the dog or just kind of taking a little breather, and all the questions pop back up. Anytime, drop us an email, selinAction@education-first.com. We are there for those questions that come up after the fact. So keep those questions coming. All right, and with 1 minute remaining, last call for questions. Going once, going twice, and done. I'm going to call it, send us an email if more questions come up. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thanks, y'all. Enjoy the rest of your day, rest of your week. Stay safe, stay warm. Reach out if you have questions.
Thanks, everyone.